This is The Book of Life, a show about Jewish kidlit, mostly. I'm Heidi Rabinowitz. Continuing the celebration of my 20th year of podcasting, I've got another archival episode for you from 2013 with author Laurel Snyder, who back at that time was best known for her iconoclastic picture book, Baxter the Pig Who Wanted to Be Kosher. Amazingly, Laurel says that the Book of Life podcast actually impacted her writing. In a 2017 article, she credited our first podcast conversation as a turning point in her career. She said, quote, "Heidi asked me, reasonably, what made my book Jewish, and I found I didn't have an answer for her. She could not possibly have known when she asked me that question a decade ago what journey she was sending me on. The power of the right question is a mighty thing." Laurel has gone on to win the 2014 Sidney Taylor Book Award Gold Medal for her picture book The Longest Night, and a 2024 Bronze for a middle grade fantasy, The Witch of Woodland. This year, she's published The Book of Candles, 8 poems for Hanukkah. If you enjoy this blast from the past, please check out other old episodes of The Book of Life from any time in the last 2 decades. Go to bookoflifepodcast.com and click on Archive in the sidebar, or just go to the episode list on your podcast player and keep on scrolling down, down, down. And in the meantime, don't forget to read my new print interview with the co-authors of Countering Anti-Semitism and Hate, a how-to guide for youth, family, and educators at the Book of Life website or on Substack. Well, Laurel Snyder, welcome to Florida.
Hello, Heidi Estrin. How are you?
I'm good. So we haven't talked in a very long time.
That's right. It's been a career for me since we last sat down together.
Right. I was thinking about that, how we did an interview years ago when we met up at Book Expo, and we were talking about what makes a book Jewish.
Yep.
And at that time you hadn't written any explicitly Jewish books, and since then you have, and I was wondering if your ideas about what makes a book Jewish have changed.
It's been so far from that moment that I'm not sure I even remember exactly what I said, so it'll be really interesting to me to go back and listen and see what I said then. Yeah, I did a book called Baxter the Pig Who Wanted to Be Kosher, and then I did a book called Nash Schlepp Schluff, Baby Yiddish, and then I did a book called Goodnight Lila Tov. So those are the Jewish picture books that have come out. I have also written a character into a novel who is, like me, the child of a Jewish intermarriage. His father's Jewish and his mother isn't. And though the book isn't explicitly Jewish, sort of moments pop up where she sort of, her relationship to the way her grandmother talks about Christmas or the way her father talks about certain foods or whatever. There's this idea that sort of there's this part of her she doesn't know very well. And then I have a book coming out in February called The Longest Night. It is a retelling of the 10 plagues and the walk to the Red Sea told through the eyes of a child. And it is, I would say, the first book where I've really sort of taken on traditional Jewish content. And then I also have later in the spring a book coming out called Camp Wonderful Wild that's a Jewish summer camp. Some other things that I'm also working on, some Talmudic retellings and things like that. So that's what I've been doing. And which of them are explicitly Jewish and how Jewish they are and what makes them so is something I guess we'll unravel here because I'm not sure I know exactly what to say about it.
If I remember correctly, you were wondering, in fact, I think this was how we met, was you emailed me this question. The question being, is a book Jewish if you purposely leave out any non-Jewish references? And I think you were talking about the fact that your illustrator, unbeknownst to you, added Santa Claus to the illustrations of a book that you thought was completely secular.
That's right. And I ended up changing some names in Any Which Wall to make them into a Jewish family.
So that you could consider them Jewish just from their names without that being part of the story.
Because it was sort of the beginning of that
So at that point we were
process.
talking about very subtle ways of making a book Jewish. And now you've been doing very unsubtle ways of making a book Jewish. Do you still agree with yourself from years past?
So I would say there are books that are incontrovertibly Jewish, right? At the other end of the extreme is where this conversation began of sort of like, well, I've taken out the elements that make it explicitly something else. Therefore, there's a space for it in a Jewish family in a way that there's not a space for a book maybe that engages with, like, A wonderful friend gave my family a really lovely book of the Nativity. She knows I love picture books. It's a gorgeous book. It's complicated. Like, what do you do with that? So those are the two extreme ends. What I'm actually most interested in right now is the middle. There are actually sort of lessons and stories that we want our kids to learn that are explicitly Jewish. And the question becomes, how else can we tell them but making them look the way we expect Jewish stories to look? Because a lot of these kids' lives don't look as Jewish as we might wish them to, or we would assume they would, or we remember our own childhoods being. I'm working on a picture book right now. It is a retelling of Honi the Circle Maker, but it's set in a small town. In my head, it's set in Iowa City, regular neighborhood where people like to garden. There is a reference to borrowing a chicken egg to make bread. It's a Friday night dinner. They're baking bread, but that's it. And it's not challah, and nobody talks about Shabbat. There's no obvious emblems that you can attach yourself to and say, oh, this is a Jewish family having a Jewish set of experiences. This is a family, and the family is learning something about what we do for future generations and what has been done for us by generations before us and how we become a part of that circle. The question is that a universal belief or is that a Jewish belief or is it both? And if we're trying to teach it as a Jewish belief, can we teach it in a way that doesn't look so Jewish?
And what's the benefit of doing that?
That it gives it a broader audience. And this is the thing that I run into. This is the fine line that I'm trying to find is, so I say to somebody, this is a book that is based on a Talmud story. I find it very valuable. I also find it valuable to non-Jewish families, but that's not actually who I'm concerned about. It's not like I want to sell this as widely as possible. What I'm concerned about is that there are families like mine. My kids will connect to it because it's Jewish. They will also connect to it because it looks like a neighborhood that is their neighborhood, and the neighbors look like their neighbors. Some kids don't live on the Lower East Side, and some kids don't live in Poland, and some kids don't live in Israel. Like, some kids live in a gated community in an Atlanta suburb, and what about those picture books? Like, some kids live in, as I do, like a transitional neighborhood in downtown Atlanta. You know, that like the sort of how do you create books for everyone? And I think, so that's my question is like, if people expect a book to look a certain way, to be Jewish, that's less important to me than what's in it. I guess that's the change from where we began, however many years ago, is that what I have come around to is that there are relevant and irrelevant things that spark for us and say this is a Jewish thing. Tikkun Olam is a relevant thing, and Torah, and like these things are relevant, but I'm not sure, and I know people get really upset when I say this, I'm not sure how relevant Kugel is for my family today. And so families look different now. And they did. They always did.
Right.
But more so, I think, now. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're saying that it's the deeper meaning more than the symbols that you're trying to get at.
And the problem is that when you start down that road, then people say to you, but everyone thinks that's important. Mm-hmm. So you say, well, yeah, that's true because it's a universally held belief in most religious cultures. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, a lot of what we believe is a universally held belief in most religious cultures. I think, more to the point, it would be inauthentic for me, who didn't grow up in a family that spoke Yiddish, who didn't grow up in a neighborhood that looked like that, or with grandparents who talked about the old country. It would be inauthentic for me to retell those stories. I don't feel like they belong to me. But I can tell you about urban Baltimore in the 80s, you know, and I want to. I think that's the point, is like when I talk about my childhood, or when my dad talks about his childhood or his Jewish childhood to my children, he's talking about urban Baltimore in the 80s. So that becomes a Jewish story. It was at Woodstock.
Right.
His story is a different story. His story is Vietnam protest and, you know, democratic socialists of America. And I mean, seriously, that's his Jewish experience. And sort of what he was driven to do out of his Jewish identity as a young person in the 60s is a very different story than his parents or his parents' parents. So I feel like that's valuable, and that I don't want to skip over that part. You know, I don't want my kids to miss that Jewish experience. Now, if you can take those Jewish universal truths, point to them and say these are Jewish, but set them in a place that feels authentic to that family or to that storyteller.
Well, it's an interesting tension between wanting to put our own modern stamp on things and wanting to connect with the past.
That's right.
Through these recognizable traditional symbols of what makes something Jewish.
But a lot of the time those don't feel like our lives. And, there's all these shell stories. It's like, that's very nice, but is there a connection for the modern child? Do they feel like that has anything to do with them? For me, we were talking before, my grandpa grew up in the shtetl.
Right.
And then immigrated to America and brought those memories with him. So I felt like I had a direct line to the world of Fiddler on the Roof.
Right.
So, for me, those stories feel like they're connected to my family. But for children now who don't have grandparents with Yiddish accents,
right.
It's a completely foreign world. It's very exotic. So you do need to find a way to make the stories fit their lives.
Right.
But is there, in your opinion, is there a place or what is the place for these old stories that are not connected to children's lives?
And I have to say, I don't think there's any threat to those stories. I think if you look at what gets published in the Jewish picture book world, I don't think there's any threat to those stories. And if I thought I could tell those stories with any kind of real claim to them, I would do it in a heartbeat. They're amazing stories and images, and I love Fiddler on the Roof and what's in Fiddler on the Roof, and I can sing it right now. It's not a question of the value of Fiddler on the Roof. It's a question of what is your story to tell. And that's not my story. But it shouldn't be an either or, it should be a both. It's like, I talk to people, and my most recent book is the one that I think is most, in some ways, problematic for people on the other side of this conversation. Goodnight Laila Tov is not a very visibly Jewish book. And people say, well, what's Jewish about it? And they put flap copy on it that talks about Tikkun Olam and whatever. And then I got emails from people about how the way that the trees in the book get planted is probably actually not good for soil erosion. At the end of the day, it's a book about the way parents care for children and the way children should be then responsible for caring for their parents. And that is a metaphor for the way we look at the environment and sort of natural world around us. I think those are Jewish values. Whether that is a distinctly Jewish value is a completely different question. But sort of, does it have value to a Jewish child to learn this from a book that both speaks to them authentically and resembles their household in a way that feels right and connects to their Jewish identity, however loose their Jewish identity may be? And that to me felt like a Jewish project. And not every family has as much Jewish content in their household. And so sometimes what I had been hearing from other people as I was sort of moving through Jewish book world, doing the events that I was doing, but also meeting people in other places, what I was hearing was some of these books make us feel like we're not doing enough. And we don't like to read those books. We don't want to read books to our kids that make us feel like we should be doing more. Now, that begs a whole other set of issues and questions, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a book that resembles that family. Mm-hmm. That there shouldn't be a book that allows, if you spend Shabbat camping on the weekends with your family because that's what feels spiritual to you, that's what feels religious to you, that's what feels Jewish to you, I think that's okay. Mm-hmm. And I think that most people in the world that I live in think that's okay. But the books don't look like that. Mm-hmm. So that was sort of the idea, was what hole is there and how can I fill that hole?
Well, I think in the world of children's literature, there's always this lag. And it's because it's grown-ups who tell the stories. And so we're basing it on times past when we were kids. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, in a lot of modern books, there are Yiddish accented grandparents who don't exist for most of the current children. And, there are grandparents who live on a small family farm and, all of these things that aren't really the current generation's experience, but the adults writing the stories, that's their memory of what childhood is supposed to be like. And I think the same parallel happens with our memory of what Judaism is supposed to look like. And so, I had this Fiddler on the Roof grandpa and, people were maybe living a little closer to a more traditional lifestyle or had more connection to the old country or more connection to the Lower East Side or, all of those kind of traditional symbols of what it means to be Jewish in America or Jewish Ashkenazi experience, which is the most widespread around here. The books are still reflecting that, whether that's the current experience or not. So it's really good that yourself and other current authors are trying to break free of that pattern and that habit and portray things the way they really are right now for the current crop of young readers. I think
it's really important for people to remember that not every book is for every reader. That you want there to be the right book out there for every reader. Mm-hmm. And you want every book to find its right reader. But not everybody's going to like every book. And the review world of Amazon and Goodreads and all this kind of stuff, it reduces things to sort of well, are you averaging a 3.87? That doesn't work for me. The books that I have loved most in my life, other people I knew hate it, My favorite Jewish Hanukkah book is the Latka Who Couldn't Stop Screaming. I know people who loathe that book, who find it offensive and upsetting. I know Christians who find it upsetting. That's why it's spectacular, is that it's distinct and specific. And my kids think it's hilarious. Mm-hmm. And I find suspect anything that doesn't give anyone a problem at all. The Goodnight Lila Tove bothered people was sort of a hoot to me just because it's an incredibly soft, innocuous book. But I don't mean by any means that I'm trying to upset people. I just think you pick up a book and you say, is this for us? And sometimes you look at it and you say, no, it's not. This is not for us. And you set it down and you find another book. And that's the idea of a bookstore or a library or a bookshelf.
Now, on a slightly different topic, you got interviewed for some major publication, I forget which one it was, about the state of Jewish children's literature. And I think it's not the only time that you've either written an article or been interviewed on this topic. And you tend to be really outspoken about the state of Jewish kid literature.
So the first time that I ever got involved with this conversation was years ago. I had written Baxter and submitted it, but it was not yet coming out. And I did a piece for Tablet, then it was called Next Book, called Where the Wild Things Aren't, about the limitations of what I was seeing in Jewish picture book life. This was actually very specifically related to the PJ Library program and the books that were coming into my home through the PJ program. Mm-hmm. I got an email from the PJ Library program the next week, and I was terrified opening this email up, and was shocked that when I opened it up, what I found was an email that said, we think you're right. We think that there's a limitation, and we want more, and we want different, and we want a wider range, and we just want as much as we can find. Help us. And so I actually ended up connecting to the PJ Library program a bunch of other authors who weren't yet writing for children, but who were Jewish writers, or children's book authors who were Jewish that weren't writing Jewish books. I mean, just sort of, that became a project for me for like a year and a half of like really working on kind of creating ideas and pushing. It was a really phenomenally exciting time to be involved in all that. A lot of the books that are coming out now are not unrelated to the project of what the PJ Library was taking on at that time. This is not to say that there were not wonderful books already. That was not what I was saying. What I was saying is that if I go to the regular bookstore and I say, what are the 10 new books that just came in today? They will show me a huge range of things. If I go to a Jewish bookstore and I say, what are the 10 most recent picture books that have come in? They look less different. The range is less wide. The humor, the sadness, the age range, the diversity. There's so many things in Jewish picture books that just felt like we had reached a level of expectation for what a Jewish picture book was supposed to look like. This isn't always text. Some of this is art direction. Some of this is size and formatting. All Hanukkah books have to be blue. If you go in and you look at a wall in a bookstore at their Hanukkah shelf, it will be 80% blue, and all of them will have a candle on the front. Like, that's just what a Hanukkah book looks like. And that instinct to say, well, does it look like it's supposed to, is an instinct that I don't like. That's not to say it's wrong. It's to say it's an instinct that I personally, as a reader and as a writer, don't like. Is to say, well, what else can a Hanukkah book look like? So that's what that instinct is. The piece that you're referring to more recently, I gave an interview. And I said the kinds of things I just said to you.
Right.
And the piece that they did made me a little bit uncomfortable.
Where was that piece? I can't remember.
It was in Kveller.
Yeah.
It made me uncomfortable because they ended the piece by saying something about like how I'm changing. Like, and that's not what I said. I don't see myself as distinct from a lot of other wonderful, wonderful Jewish writers who are doing all kinds of wonderful things right now. My comment is not about writers making art. My comment is about the way that the industry chooses to put books forward. It's the way the jacket flaps get designed. It's the way that the people order books at bookstores. It's the way that Amazon positions things on its websites. It's about distribution. There are brilliant writers all over this country writing books no one will ever see because they're too strange and they're too different and they're too amazing. So it's really not a criticism of artists, and certainly not a criticism of the other people who are putting out Jewish picture books right now, because some of them are just startlingly fabulous.
Right now, 2012, what do you feel is the state of Jewish kidlit?
I think that it's a much wilder, more interesting thing than it had been for a chapter of its life. I've thought a lot about why I think Jewish children's books got stuck. I think what happens is Jews enter publishing and sort of become an important part of the publishing world, just as children's books are growing. And then simultaneously, all the news starts to leak back from Europe. And I think at that moment in time, there was this clenching. You know, it was Zlata the Goat comes into existence sort of at a moment where, like, we needed a way to memorialize and to pay tribute and to hold on to those stories and those ideas. People have the sense that that Sydney Taylor's books came out, that they're about the time when they were published. But
they were published in the 50s.
Right, they're published after World War II. They're published after the Holocaust. Like, this is a period where people are going, let's hold on to what we don't have anymore.
Right.
But the contemporary experience was horrible. The contemporary experience was despairing. The contemporary experience was, our culture has been destroyed. I think something happened there. I think you take a certain number of years and you put out the same product for a certain number of years, that just becomes the product. Mm-hmm. I think things got stuck, and then there was this sense that this is what we're allowed to do. This is what we can do. Mm-hmm. I think that's why some of the more innovative Jewish picture book writers over the years didn't do Jewish picture books, because they wanted to do something that pushed against that model. And so I think it has been relatively recently that we've sort of found people doing different things.
Well, so for both Jewish books and mainstream books, what is your favorite picture book right now?
Like that's just come out in recent years?
Yeah, something recent.
In Jewish picture books, I really loved Yetta. Beautiful Yetta, the Yiddish Chicken. Uh-huh. I loved the multilingual stuff that went. I think that's a really good example of a book that somehow, because it's Daniel Pinkwater, it strikes a tone that feels traditional. Even though it's Brooklyn, it's organic, it's doing all the stuff that is contemporary. Uh-huh. And there was something about it that really, really, really touched me. A picture book that I really love this year that I think isn't getting enough play is a book called Chloe and the Lion. Do you know Chloe and the Lion?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard of it.
So it's Mac Barnett and Adam Rex, but it totally breaks the fourth wall. They're creating a character, and Adam is drawing it, and Mac is telling the story. And it keeps getting revised. It's like, it's going to be a dragon. No, it's going to be a lion. And like, it keeps getting revised, and then the character kind of takes over the story. And the artists are themselves depicted by these clay guys that look like them, sort of at the bottom of the page. It's really unusual. Mm-hmm. It's in the vein of the monster at the end of this book, or We Are in a Book. That's sort of that meta thing. Yeah. But I like books that push kids to sort of use their brains differently. Mm-hmm. I think that's pretty awesome.
It's interesting that those are the two you named, because they are both very break the mold kind of books.
Yeah. What's your favorite Jewish picture book of recent years?
Well, my favorite one right now, I discovered when I went to ALA this year, and I stood there in Peachtree's booth crying because I found Zeta Comes to Live by Sherry Sinek.
I haven't seen it.
Which is a book about the grandpa is dying. Uh-huh. But, most books for kids about dealing with death happen after the grandparent died, and now it's like, oh, where did they go?
Right, right.
And this one is about, he's there, he came to live at their house for his final days, and it's about treasuring those last moments, because everybody's conscious that he doesn't have long.
Right.
And so
that's so good.
I'm welling up now. It's the little girl and the grandpa are sort of sitting together treasuring.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm gonna cry. So, but it's a beautiful, beautiful book, and Christina Swarner illustrated it, and she always does those sort of dreamy, spiritual Jewish books, even though she's not even Jewish, but she's gotten into this trend of doing Jewish books. And it's a new author. So,
very cool.
Yeah.
That's, again, that's the kind of, I can see that hitting an editorial wall and people being like, people don't want to read about this, it's too sad, or something like that. It's important to push through that and to create that book for that moment. Yeah.
So what are you working on next?
So the book that's coming out in February is called The Longest Night, and it's this retelling of the 10 Plagues. It's a sort of rhyming picture book with an illustrator named Katya Shien, who is phenomenal. The book is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm very, very excited about that. I've been working on the Baxter sequel for years.
Sequel.
It may never exist. I've been working on it. I feel like there's so many Baxters out there that it seems like a foregone conclusion that we could sell a second book, but I can't get it right. But it's called Baxter's Big Fall, and it's all about the autumnal season and how exhausting it is. And sort of he gets very excited about and sort of discovers all of these new holidays, and by the end is like, oh my God, I can't handle this. But I still haven't found exactly the right mix.
Thank you so much for this very fun conversation.
It was super fun. It's always nice to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
There are so many ways to connect with the Book of Life. Fan us at facebook.com/Book of Life Podcast. Follow us at twitter.com/Book of Life Pod. Email us at bookoflifepodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 561-2 888-206-2473. You can also listen to the latest episode by phone at 916-313-3820. And of course, find links to everything at bookoflifepodcast.com. The Book of Life is a podcast service of the Feldman Library at Congregation B'nai Israel in Boca Raton, Florida at cbiboca.org and is supported in part by the Association of Jewish Libraries at jewishlibraries.org. Our background music is provided by the Freilach Makers Klezmer String Band at freilachmakers.com. Thanks for listening and happy reading.